Give me a cue or something. All right, hi everybody. Thanks for coming to our panel this week. This is the special Memorial Day folk life alternate panel on Virwescon's take on quoting. And my name is Tracy Furutani. I teach physics at North Seattle College. And my quote is pretty much going to be, give me a good one, guys. All right, actually, I'm going to go last because basically I want to get some inspiration. So, Charlotte, you want to take it away? Introduce yourself and what's your favorite quote? Where's it from?
Oh, yay me. Charlotte Lewis Brown. I'm a paleontologist, but I also author for adults and children, including a bunch of dinosaur books. And it's really hard to narrow down for favorites. So talking to Tracy a little bit beforehand, we were going back and forth. What do you even consider a favorite? There's what means the most to you, what do you use the most, and maybe what has a special meaning. So I thought I'd throw out actually something that I use the most, which is have fun storming the castle. And I have found that a lot of people think you mean it as an upbeat thing. It's not how it's in the original, and it's I've definitely had people say, oh, thank you. I'm like, you're welcome. So I'm gonna wish everybody, let's have fun storming the castle.
Thank you. All right, I guess we'll move over to Coral then. What's your favorite?
Hello, I am Coral Moore. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer. My background is in biology, and I was going to use a Princess Bride quote also, but I can't do that now because Charlotte stole it. So what am I going to quote? Oh,
come on,
no.
Who cares about Pride?
Who cares about Pride?
Well, it is one of the most quotable movies out there.
It is. It's extremely quotable, and there's lots of really good quotes. My favorite one from that, and I'm just going to lean on that because that's what I had in my head when they are having the sword fight, and Inigo says, "Who are you?" And whenever anyone says, "Who are you?" I always say, "No one of consequence." And that's probably the thing I quote the most anywhere. So
I must know.
I must know. Get used to disappointment.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
That's great.
I like that one.
All right, so I'll just go in order of the little squares on the screen here. Jake, welcome. Introduce yourself. What's your favorite quote? Where's it from?
Jake McKenzie, high school science teacher, and the one I use in class fairly frequently is, I don't think that means what you think it means. So I have no pride, but I also do have a shirt that I wear at least once a year that has one of the little name badges on the chest, and it says, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya." And if the kids get it, it's like I ask them to see their hands. So that was my high school. I'm sorry.
You should make them finish the quote.
Yeah, they don't. We're getting old enough that they don't recognize it. Sadly enough.
I tell you, this education is terrible in this country. All right.
I know. I do what I can, but there's only so many times you can make them watch, Monty Python and the Holy Grail before they start questioning your curriculum.
That's not true at all.
At the high school level, it is. College, you guys can do whatever you want, but I can't.
Tom, welcome, and please introduce yourself. What's your quote, and where's it from?
Well, before I go all Darmok on you, we want to look at the difference between quotes and references. So that was a reference to Star Trek: The Next Generation, to a society that entirely communicated in references. And I'm Tom Whitmore. I used to run a science fiction bookstore. I'm now retired from being a massage therapist because it's not safe to do massage under the current regime of plague. But, half the time quotes are intended to make people think of something, and sometimes they're just intended to be fun. This is why I often quote a lot of poetry. The Hunting of the Snark has a quote for almost every situation. Taking 3 as a number to reason about, a reasonable number to state, you add 7 and 10 and then multiply out by 1,000 diminished by 8. The result you proceed to divide, you will see by 990 and 2, then subtract 17 and the answer must be exactly and perfectly true. See, this is
Ow.
this is really useful for getting into abuse arguments, because what that does is basically it mathematically takes the number 3 and goes through a whole set of transforms and turns it to 3. It's this with any number. The honey
Oh, God.
of real wonderful quotes. You know, the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes, which is absolutely useful if you're in a complete and total cock-up where everything is going wrong. So we can keep going for hours with Lewis Carroll, but then you can also go off into Gillette Burgess, or you can go into, there's so much in poetry that makes wonderful quotations. So there's my start.
It's almost like poets use their words carefully.
No,
Yeah.
you don't say. You don't say. Or was it? You didn't say.
Ricky, not to leave you out, Dr. Ricky, want to,
Hi.
and also your quote and source.
Yes, hi. I go by the nom de internet of Dr. Ricky. I am a scientist. I like to teach using food. And well, to correct, not to correct Tom too much, but it's not that in the episode Darmok, it's not about references, but to quote the great Jean-Luc Picard, they spoke in metaphor.
Yes, but they were referential metaphors.
But instead of using a quote that everyone uses a lot, there's a quote I've been dying to use one day, but I've never had the opportunity to use it. And one day, maybe I hope I will. And that is, if you value your lives, be somewhere else.
Oh, God.
That is from, anybody know that reference?
Oh.
No, it's from Babylon 5.
Ah, okay.
I'm afraid you're going to get your chance.
That is
Better than you think.
That is from when, yeah, Karen got it. It's a Babylon 5 reference. It's from when, what's her name? The Minbari ship comes up and says, only one human captain has ever survived the Minbari fleet. He is behind me. You're in front of me. If you value your lives, be somewhere else.
Yeah,
But I've never had a
you're gonna
chance to
be
use
able
it yet.
that soon.
Yes. And there you go. By the way, Jake, what I do want to know is that shirt that you wear once a year, what we want to know is the frequency in which you wash it.
Do what?
Probably once a year.
The shirt that you wear once a year, the frequency of washing is...
What's your point?
Yes.
Every 5 years? Every 3 years?
Black
If you
socks.
wash it, look, hey, if you wash it, then people come closer and try to read it more.
Well, and the print wears off.
Yes.
You know, black socks, they never get dirty. The longer you wear them, the blacker they get. The
Mhm.
stronger they
Then-
get.
Yeah, and then when they stand up, they're easier to find.
Well, I'll say
Slide your feet into.
the shirt I have that I have to wear at least once a year. It's always tough because I have so many good dinosaur shirts now that it's competition. But you know, no matter where you go, there you are. And
Yes, I'm a big Buckaroo Banzai fan too.
You've seen the one I wear at Virwescon that says,
you can remember it.
yeah,
You're
power
any minute
corrupt.
now.
Yeah, power corrupts. Study hard, be evil.
Oh,
there's
I
also-
need
knowledge-
that.
From,
Knowledge is power. Study hard, be evil. Yeah.
From the beginning of Lord Love a Duck, which is a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Go to school, get a little knowledge, live dangerously.
So Tracy, I think you're up.
Really often, yes.
Well, okay.
Lord Love a Duck is an underappreciated movie. None of you have probably seen.
That is a movie, Tom.
Yes.
Oh, I'll have to take a look. So please type in the chat what the title is, because I'm gonna spell it wrong, I'm certain. So thanks. All right, so my quote then is basically, if you've noticed my background, that's from Gravity Falls, the Disney Plus show. And the quote from there is Mabel, who I'm blocking, that's her there. Her quote is, every idea is a good idea, which is why I decided to convene this panel. The idea that, yeah, there's no wrong answers. We're going to share quotes that we love and that guide our lives. At one point in my life, I think every second sentence I said, and I think Charlotte can back me up on this, was a Simpsons quote. So the point is that I think it informs our lives. It actually, in fact, can be transformative. You can think of something, connections between two very disparate things through quotes, which is kind of fun. I still do it to a large degree. I mean, I think all of us probably have a favorite Monty Python and the Holy Grail quote, for instance.
I'm not dead yet.
But
Holy Grail, but
so the reason this came up was I was having a discussion with someone else about what's your, the question came up, what's your favorite movie? And I said, well, define favorite. And they said, oh, everybody knows, just say what it is. So I said, okay, well, my favorite movie is one that I quote from the most. And they were so offended by that notion. They basically said, no, movies are what, how they make you feel. And it's not really about the dialogue. And I'm like, no, that's not true at all. And so I want to kind of throw this out to you, is that basically, how do you tie your love of that particular quote with the work that it's from? Are your favorite quotes from your favorite movie, for instance? I give examples.
I was actually thinking about this because Tracy had mentioned it, so I actually had time to think. But the favorite books I have, I love Terry Pratchett. Anybody who knows me knows, there's so much to love there, and it has a lot of quotes, some of which are pithy and short, but often situational, others of which are a little bit longer, and I'm gonna get the words quite a little bit wrong, but one thing I love in the Tiffany Aiken books about a girl who is becoming a witch, for those who haven't read it, she goes on a journey and comes back, and there's a quote to the effect of, just because you've come back just because you've returned doesn't mean you've come back to the same place. And he says it much better than that. I was actually, I meant to look that up, but you don't really have a chance to use that except in your own head. So I talk to myself a lot. I quote to myself a lot. Quoting out loud is a little bit, I'd have to probably go with something else.
One of the things that I've always seen reach into what you're talking about, Tracy, is actually one of our panelists years ago gave me a packet of quotes that meant something to them. And it started something that I began on my walls in 2004 with my classroom. Every week I have 2 different quotes I put up, and I now have a collection of several thousand. And depending on the situation, you can use a quote. It may not be from something that's a favorite of yours, but it may be something that for that moment, like every year for my students on Martin Luther King's birthday week, I quote a Marion Zimmer Bradley quote from one of her lesser known books that is, leave others their otherness. Powerful quote. I've only read the book a couple times, but it's something that jumped out and means something. And so does it have to be your favorite movie? No, but there is something about it that grabs you and says, this is something that can be meaningful.
And you're not pulling it even out of context or anything, right? It is basically completely fits the context of the holiday.
It is completely. It's this guy learning to be with aliens, and this huge lizard-like creature who's saying, people are often afraid of me because I'm so large and scary. And I tell people, leave others their otherness because you don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. And so with Martin Luther King, judge people for who they are, not what they look like. It's a very powerful piece for them to see that in a different quote than the standard,
right.
Piece.
The ones that we see all the time. Absolutely. Great. That's a good example. I like that. Anyone else want to share? Basically something that is from, it's a quote that you use, but it's not necessarily from a favorite thing that you may have.
I now have to wonder whether we need to be PG-13 on this channel.
I already
had
broke
that
that
same
line the first
problem.
panel. Come on.
I've learned how to edit the soundtrack.
Or I can bleep it.
Well, in that case,
No, because
my favorite quote starts with an F. That's
I mean, because I mean, sometimes like the thing about quotes is that number one, you need it kind of intimates a kind of cultural commonality with the audience who you're quoting it to. Right, especially if you quote something from another language entirely, and they're like, like, why does that mean anything to me? And some of the quotes are only meaningful in that language, but also some of it is how catchy it is to your brain. It might not be the best thing around, but it's catchy. It might not be your favorite movie. So my favorite one is the first time I saw South Park the musical. I still think it's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. But it was certainly very profanity laden, and to this day, I will probably end up humming "Shut Your Effin' Face, Uncle Effer" without.
for the longest time after that movie, I could not stop walking around and somebody would say something, and I'd look at him and go, "It's not real."
Exactly.
Over in the chat, someone commented on the long quote about the good boots, expensive boots lasting so much longer effectively than poorly made boots from Terry Pratchett. And I said that that's usually done as a reference rather than a quote, just to Vimes's boots. And the question of what's a reference and what's a quote is a really hard line to draw sometimes. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold from Robert W. Service is a great thing to toss into a conversation, but it's not particularly, it's usually apropos of things being weird around here right now.
Shaka, when the walls fell.
Yeah.
Well, we just go around saying it's the first time I've been warm.
Yes.
Rather than, finishing with the end of the poem rather than the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Ballad of Sam McGee.
Sam McGee, yes.
So do you like Ricky was talking about, do you actually compress it into like, something like Vimes's boots for use in a conversation?
Well, let's give the full context for Vimes's, like you kind of did, but I think what I love about the Vimes boots quote is the fact that it's the thin boots, his cheap boots, that actually help him feel the city. Mm-hmm. So
there's actually a reference to that. I think I've never heard the Terry Pratchett thing before because I'm not a big Pratchett fan. Sorry, but in David Eddings.
Heresy.
In David Eddings, the Belgariad.
Belgariad.
Yeah. Potato. Belgarath the sorcerer always wears two different boots because he said the right one from this pair fit me better and the left one from a different pair fit me better, so I wear the ones that fit me best and I don't care if they don't match. I wonder if that's kind of a reference now hearing the Pratchett thing. I wonder if that's what drove that.
Or which way it went, actually. Which book came first?
Probably Pratchett.
Eddings
was in the mid 80s.
Okay.
Well, and Pratchett was writing through into the aughts, and so was Eddings.
Right, but I mean the Eddings books, the Belgariad was written in the 1980s because it was coming out when I was in junior high, in high school.
But that kind of brings us back around to how much does your audience determine what you're going to quote? Because like I had never heard that Pratchett quote either. So if you just said Vimes's boots, I'd be like, what are they talking about?
I was confused.
So yeah, it's interesting. And how much your day-to-day conversation when you rely on something like a pop culture reference depends on who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me as a high school teacher, that's just, I mean, the things that you'll actually go from class to class because you may have a class that's got a bunch of kids that no Monty Python. With that class, you learn that you can make comments and they'll find it humorous, but the next period may not have anybody. And it's so, you know, it is kind of odd as far as your audience as to how your quotes have to flow in, you know, not with your group of friends, but with in common interactions.
In a
Are you one of those,
sociological sense.
just quick question, are you one of those teachers that laugh at their own jokes, Jake?
Yeah, because I don't give a shit what anybody else does.
Yeah, no,
I mean, there we go. See, I don't care. I'm here for my enjoyment.
sorry, Tom.
In a sociological sense, I know that I sometimes use quotes as shibboleths, i.e. to find out who is a member of my tribe. Does this person know this or not?
Right.
Does this person get it? Do they care about it? Usually the quotes that I'm tossing in like that are not necessary for understanding, but they build a tiny bridge to bring people together when they are understood. If you don't understand, fine. You know, it doesn't really matter that much. But if you do understand, we then have a new link and a new way to talk to each other.
You can also,
an in-group.
it can also have a double meaning. Like, you know, have fun storming the castle. If they don't know what you're talking about, they're like, yeah, oh, great. And the thing is, even people who've seen the movie sometimes say, oh, thanks.
They're more likely to say, oh, thanks.
Well, it's happened to me a couple of times. People will get up and say, okay, once more under the breach, meaning back to work. And first time I really didn't want to go back to the project since it was a failing project. I look at somebody and said, or close the wall up with our English dead. And they're like, why are you talking zombies? So the rest of the quote from Shakespeare, you know, okay, never mind. Yeah. So it can sometimes be a little bit awkward, but usually people play.
Well, it's like, so my kids will sometimes get just the ones that don't get it. Tom, going back to your who understands. With my upper level kids, often I can make higher level jokes, right? So a lot of times for tests, I'll have some quote on the board when they walk in. And the interesting one is what kids I figure out, what classes I can figure out that when they walk in, the Black Knight's standing there with a sword saying, none shall pass.
That's mean.
And they're like, oh, this is gonna be one of those tests, huh? And I go, we'll see. You know, it's like, you know, and then, but the follow-up for that a lot of times is the next day when they get the test back, if they did well, there'll be a picture of the Black Knight saying, you know, with one of his legs missing going, 'tis but a flesh wound. You know, and so they get the idea that you know, that there's a joke in there, and that even if they don't quite understand what's going on, I'm trying to be funny and trying to make a human contact by being more me than just that face in front of the room. You know, because
right, by encasing yourself in black armor. Gotcha.
hey, don't knock my methods of communication.
It's when he starts cutting off limbs that shows real dedication.
That's right.
And it allows identification with those members in the class who are differently abled.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think Tom's point is very good that, in fact, a lot of the times I use quotes, they're just throwaways. They're really not meant to add that much to what I'm saying. But at the same time, for people who have the same cultural background or whatever as I do, it adds some depth to the conversation, some flavor to the conversation. So to that
Really
regard,
corroborative detail to add verisimilitude to an otherwise bald and unconvincing narrative.
Exactly. There you go. And what are you?
Gilbert and Sullivan.
In point of composition, he is not deficient.
That's my
okay. This has become a dazzling and bold.
Pride and prejudice. Sorry.
Oh, music is when you add music to it or some kind of lyricism to it, it always makes it more quotable because it sticks to your brain. Right. It's usually harder to just remember some line of dialogue. But if it's set to music or it's set to some kind of rhythmic pattern, it shows up.
This is one reason why poetry is easier to use.
Right. Mimsy where the borough goes.
And the Mome Raths out grave, getting back to Lewis Carroll, of course. There are people who've tried to put that to music, but I've never found any of them at all reasonable.
Well, they probably should ask William Shatner or Leonard Nimoy.
Oh, good call.
Nimoy could do it better.
No, but Shatner's so much more memorable. Except maybe like, what's that? The Hobbit.
Yeah, the Ballad of Bilbo.
The Ballad of Bilbo.
Yes.
You know, in my college friend group for a long time, we had the William Shatner CD, and it got passed around as a white elephant for quite a while. I don't know whatever happened to it, but it was like,
It got made into a CD.
yeah,
I remember the
still
LP.
find it. Yeah, it was one of those rare, weird things you could find. You can find
Yeah,
anything on the internet.
This is a story
unfortunately.
you need to tell your kids and see who still remembers what a CD is.
Or who William Shatner is.
He's that
Not
Priceline guy, right?
Not dead yet.
Well, actually, there's a really wonderful thing of him doing a thing about deep frying turkeys, which has been turned into a song, which is truly bizarre and wonderful.
Does he sing it or does somebody else sing it?
Basically, they use his speech as the song. You know, he's not actually singing; he's saying these things, and people have set beats to the background and
Oh,
put
it's
his
Are you guys-
autotune.
words
Are
into
you
it.
guys familiar with Rapper's Delight? The song Rapper's Delight.
No.
Yes.
It was a late 1970s, early 1980s. It's considered classic early rap. And somebody took it and spliced it. I can't remember what I've got the link somewhere. But they actually took two newscasters from CBS News and went through and found where they said the words to the lyrics of the song over about 10 years of TV. And
Oh, yeah.
they set it to tune so that these two newscasters do Rapper's Delight back and forth and do the two parts of it the whole way through. And it's hilarious.
I've seen similar things to that.
Yeah. Imagine if they had
I love the fact that you actually called something classic rap. Have you ever thought of it, you get to the time where rap can be considered classic? I like it.
Stop. Don't be judgmental. Leave others their otherness.
That's you, Black Knight.
years ago now, just to basically a cultural touchstone.
And then there are the things which I quote sometimes to get people started, to get a conversation started. If, for example, we're talking about openings to stories, my favorite opening to a story is the opening of Silverlock by John Myers Myers, which is the first line of which is, "If I had cared to live, I would have died." And I say to people now, that's a narrative hook. That you really want to find out what's going on with that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. You know, a lot of my quotes are from the first lines of books. Like, for instance, I think many of you may recognize this one. It's not science fiction. It was at Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs began to take hold.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hitchhiker's
Not sure.
Guide. Sorry, that's not Hitchhiker's
Ah,
Guide.
okay.
Fear and Loathing.
Yes. Fear and Loathing. Yes. And then, of course, there are the ending lines like, "Well, I'm back," he said, which is a really standard thing that I say when I walk through the door.
Which is whom?
That's from
That's
that's
Lord
from
of the Rings.
Yeah, that's Sam when he walks back into his house
Yeah.
after seeing
At the end of
Bilbo
Lord
off,
of
or
the
seeing
Rings,
Frodo
yeah.
off. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
And
ringing
a
a bell,
hole in
but
the
I
ground
hadn't
with
read
The
it.
Hobbit is not one that you can use a whole lot. But "Well, I'm back," he said, you can really use.
Yes.
Got a lot of miles out of that one.
Yeah.
I only got about 15 pages into Two Towers and then I stopped. I'm very sorry about that.
It took me 3 tries to get any further than that. Seriously.
You know,
I
I don't.
did not go through the Lord of the Rings at least the first 2, probably the first 3 times I tried. And then when I finished it, I wondered why I'd had trouble.
Right.
The Two Towers was rough. It was probably the hardest of the books to read, but you know.
Yeah.
All right. You've given me credit. I'll bite the bullet.
It took me a couple tries. I did it over one spring break finally in Los Angeles when I was in junior high, which is probably about the perfect age. And by the end of it, I looked up and I'm like, the sun's shining. How did that happen?
Yep.
I felt that way at one point when I picked up The Hobbit about midnight. And when I looked up, the sun was shining because I just finished rereading the whole book.
I think one of the things for me is you talk about books that are quotable. A lot of the books I've read, I mean, like one of my favorite authors is Michael Moorcock, but he doesn't have a whole lot of quotes in there that are anything that I would quote. So it's not, we talked about, Tracy, you were talking about things that are meaningful to you. How do they reach to you? That's one of my all-time favorite authors. I've got a picture of him signing one of my books back when he was at Virwescon a few years ago. And it's like, there's not a lot of quotable stuff in it. So I don't know whether I don't know, for me at least, whether quotes always speak to something I really always enjoyed, or whether they're just something that for the moment.
Right.
It's a different dimension.
Yeah.
With that, you've got Mervyn Peake, whose prose is absolutely beautiful, but who is completely unquotable.
Oh.
There are some people where you just don't want to quote it. You just want to be in the moment with it.
Okay, is it anything else you can add about why it's unquotable?
Because it is so baroque and so complex that trying to keep one whole sentence in one's mind is not quite as bad as with Faulkner, but it gets very close.
Or with Moorcock, it's just the story is the story.
Yeah.
It's not, there's not a piece that stands out. You think of chapters and scenes, but there's not it's the building of it,
There are some people who are storytellers, and there are some people who are writers. Moorcock is a great example of a good storyteller. So is Alan Dean Foster, who tells great stories, but his prose is often dreadful. And I like Alan. He's a really nice guy. And I am really glad that he's made lots of money writing novelizations, and that he gets to be one of those people who's out there being good at what he does. But he's not the person to go to for deathless prose.
Well, do you think there's a trend to, it's more quotable if somebody is forced to write in a very short form? Like the shorter the story, the easier it is to quote. Because the problem with people who are very verbose is that you can get lost in the sea of minutiae.
Yes, well, then of course there's It's a Cookbook.
I mean, like any of the great Russian novelists. Oh my God.
There are great Russian novelists?
Yes, there are.
Did you not hear the quote marks when I said great Russian novelist?
You get someone like Dickens with "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times," which is completely quoted.
Especially today, for some
Don't say Dickens ever. Me and Dickens are not friends. I cannot handle that. I know.
There's a great story about Avram Davidson being at a lecture where somebody was saying, the thing that you have to do as a writer is make your characters come alive. They have to come alive in the very first sentence. And Avram called out from the back, "Marley was dead to begin with," which is the first line of The Christmas Carol. So proving that any author, the whole idea there being to say that authors can break any rule if they do it well.
I think, Ricky, what you were talking about, the whole idea is that quotable things are things that can be small pieces that without any supporting pieces, we can paint a picture. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it's whatever, somehow, some way it paints a picture, at least for you as a quoter, it gives you some sort of piece that makes you feel like, oh, okay, that's cool. I mean,
except that the quote is more like that one swoop of a line that Picasso could do that created a perfect image in your head from almost nothing.
Right, that's fair.
And a good quote will do that.
There are things that don't necessarily need much context either, because I think some of the, like when you guys were saying your favorite books weren't necessarily quotable. Some of the things I love most about books is that, that the narrative arc is so dependent on things that have gone before it and things that will follow after it. So they need a lot of context in order to make them mean something. Whereas quotes are like one-liners, right? It's just something that stands alone, and yeah, maybe it means different things to different people, but the unit itself kind of just, it can exist without any other explanation around it.
It transcends a deeper knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I guess
Yeah.
that's solid.
Similar to
that's how I'm quoting
rebound
now.
and
It transcends
hell
a
of a
deeper
nice animal
knowledge.
frequently mistaken for a meatloaf. Right?
Well, it's just heaven by the dashboard light.
Yeah.
Would you do anything for love?
Remember you forever, Eddie.
I'll close the door behind me on the way out.
I have all three.
Just
of
call
those
me Angel in the
albums.
morning.
No, I will not. Marianne Faithful. Was it Marianne Faithful? I can't remember. Showing my age.
I would do anything, but not that.
Oh.
Make
And
things
that also brings up a good point that the best quotes probably resist misquoting. Like they still mean something even when you get it wrong a little bit. People know what you're talking about even when you don't quote it exactly right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the Princess Bride quotes I've heard are, of course, wrong in slight ways, but of course you know what they're talking about, so it doesn't really matter. You get the feeling of what they're trying to convey.
Well, think about one of the most common ones that gets misquoted is double, double, toil and trouble.
Oh, that's never said.
Huh?
That wasn't said, right?
Yeah.
Play it
So if you
again,
were-
Sam.
Huh?
Play it again,
Say
Sam.
it again, Sam.
Right.
Which is
Not
play it.
actually said.
There's no again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you say the quote, but the quote's been misstated so many times that people still reference it to something that they may not have ever seen.
Right.
I've never seen Casablanca, but I know that quote.
That's kind of the Shakespeare thing too, right? That so
Yeah.
many of his quotes have
The
turned into
Mandela
like
effect.
idioms.
Yeah.
That's what they call it, the Mandela effect. It's a sort of shared cultural memory of something that never really happened.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the Mandela effect. If you have a chance to look it up, because it's just like people swear something that happened to Nelson Mandela or something that Nelson Mandela said, and everyone swears up and down that it actually happened when it never actually did.
Or all of the quotes that get attributed to Lincoln or Shakespeare or
Jefferson,
Oscar Wilde or Jefferson. Yeah. Yeah.
You can't believe everything you read on the internet. Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
come on, he totally would have said that if he was still alive, so it's fine.
Dude, but he was never a fan of theater. So
But he
Yes,
was
he
killed
was.
at the theater. What was the
Too soon.
Our American cousin.
So, yes, there's a chat room question, which is, are there dad quotes like there are dad jokes?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
well, I mean, I guess
Each dad
they're
has
kind of
their own.
they're kind of the same thing, aren't they?
I guess.
I was waiting for you to say that.
I mean, honestly, I mean, I think my daughter was 8 when she goes, "Why don't you ever make any good dad jokes?" And I literally looked at her and I go, and it took her a second. She goes, "Hey!"
I got a quote from my dad, which is, he was one of these people who knew everything. And at one point somebody said, "Is there anything you don't know much about?" And he said, "Well, I don't know much about botany." And so, "Well, I don't know much about botany" becomes a quote that I toss out that nobody's going to get. But it's an internal joke for me. And that's
that
often
was Paul
what
Simon.
a lot of these
wasn't
things
it?
are.
Wasn't that Paul Simon? Because that was the song "Don't Know Much About
History.
Biology.
So much biology.
History, Biology." Yeah, so that
But
was
botany doesn't show up there.
right. But maybe it was his riff on it.
No,
Oh, okay. Just asking.
no, it wasn't.
So I don't think that was Paul Simon.
I can't remember who it was.
It was Herman's Hermits, yes.
It was Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
It was Nelson Mandela.
We
Or
frequently
Abraham
sang
Lincoln,
it.
one or the other.
The one,
Trey's having an aneurysm over there.
the one that I recall is that a friend of my, father of my friend, basically would quote Die Hard to him, and of course one of the key lines there is "Yippee-ki-yay, MF," and he didn't actually want to say that second part to his kid, so Yippee-ki-yay became kind of short for that entire bit of the movie. And so I think in that regard, that's kind of a dad joke that got riffed into a family reference.
I mean, having a 15-year-old daughter, it's, yeah, pretty much everything I say is a bad joke. You know.
Well, I'll go one step farther than a dad joke. Trying to think how much detail to give here.
Uh-oh.
We'll go back to high school.
Beginning, go on until you come to the end and then stop, okay?
I'll stop shortly after the beginning, but back in high school, I needed quotes or I thought I had stupid assignments. I'm sure this never happens to anybody these days, right? But you got stupid English assignments in high school. So I started quoting myself. Only, of course, you can't quote yourself. So I just made up a pen name. And then, you know,
You're still using it.
some decades later, I'm like, hey, I need a pen name. I know what to use.
Nice.
That's brilliant.
I love it.
Oh,
Or as
I'm totally
Abraham
gonna
Lincoln
make
once said, ouch.
A pen name for
And a bunch of other things that we couldn't actually say here on the talk. That's a reference quote to Dan O'Neill and the comic strip Odd Bodkins. But that's
I
always
think-
useful is, you know, if somebody's trying to think of a quote, you can say, well, as Abraham Lincoln once said, ouch. And
I
so-
always like quoting George Carlin, but you know, there's a
Oh.
line in the sand of what you can quote. You know, one of the ones that, you know, most people don't get, especially my students, is they'll start, you know, getting upset about something. I'll say, relax, have a mint.
Well, if we've mentioned comics, Calvin and Hobbes,
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of great
Oh,
moments.
yeah.
A lot of them are visual. The first one I saw of that with having no context at each other, he's giving himself a bath in the toilet. So his father's just hearing the flush, whee! And the last one is, I don't want to know. But there's also one where he's hammering nails into the coffee table and his mother comes in and screams, why do you do these things? Like, bad genes?
And there's another one where he's doing the same thing, and she goes, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "Isn't it obvious?"
Yes, exactly. So those become shorthand too sometimes.
Yeah, I think
Scientific progress goes boink.
And I think one of the other things is I think that Charlotte just brought up, which is I think kind of important, is when you can actually have a dialogue. So if the other person knows what you're talking about, it becomes almost like a standard greeting, right? So for instance, Firesign Theater, who some of you remember, there's a lot of quotable stuff from that, which are actually just skits, dialogues between people. So if you're doing it by yourself, it sounds kind of stupid. But if you have somebody else participating, it actually becomes sort of an exchange of information. So,
And they even did the opposite of that in one of them, there's somebody ordering a pizza and they get some sort of garbled answer and they say never come out in the suburbs. And another one, the Nick Danger one, there's no anchovies, you've got the wrong man. I spell my name Danger, which is the other side of that conversation.
right.
And you know, if you haven't put things together, you don't know it. It's like the opening and closing of Pink Floyd's The Wall. In very, very soft voice. The opening is where we came in, and the ending is, isn't this? So, like Dahlgren, it's a story that loops entirely back around on itself.
Well, and it's kind of like you mentioned earlier. It gives you that ability to communicate with somebody in a way that makes you have something in common with them.
Mhm.
You know, that kind of makes for a quicker connection
Mhm.
with a person.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, if they understand what you're talking about and what your joke is going to, then obviously they have something beyond just being a person.
But
Hollywood's doing this a lot increasingly. It seems like in the last decade, in that the movies they show out either have quotes repurposed, or particularly kid movies, they'll have something straight for the kids, but then they're throwing in quotes and references all through mostly the 80s, but getting into the 90s.
Well, Phineas and Ferb was again classic for that. Is watching it with my daughter, I'd be sitting there going, she's laughing at the jokes, and I'm sitting there going, there's one part where Perry the Platypus is fighting the bad guy, and the bad guy does this to something on the wall, like it's going to come to his hand, and I just started cracking up. She's like, "What's so funny about that?" And I'm like, "Never mind." It took her a couple of years when she's finally watching the Star Wars movies to go, "Hey."
Rocky and Bullwinkle did that long before Phineas and Ferb, though.
Oh yeah.
You know, the whole Kerber Derby sequence, which they couldn't re-show because Durbard Kirby objected to being put forward as an emblem of mediocrity. But everything that was going on, you know, stroke, 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 bail, 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 bail. You know, you get lots of things in there that were jokes for the adults. But the kids thought they were just great fun too. As with What's Opera, Doc? Kill the Wabbit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Kill the Wabbit is one of those things that we all quote, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
No, Spear and Magic Helmet.
Yes, there you go.
Spear Magic Helmet.
Well, that's just the next line. What do you expect from an opera?
Duck season.
Yeah.
Rabbit season.
Oh, that was a great introduction to opera. It really is.
I always expected, you know, nothing.
All right, so we're getting close to basically when we have to finish. Unfortunately, we're having a great discussion, but I wanted to give opportunity for any of our audience members to ask a question. If you want to type it in the chat to ask our distinguished panelists here.
Distinguished.
Yes, you can tell we're each separate, so we're distinguished.
I have a
Differentiated.
sidebar we can talk about a little bit while we're waiting for questions. What about quotes that don't have any kind of attribution to them? You know, things that are like, one of my favorite ones is, you know, always be yourself. Unless you can be a unicorn, then be a unicorn.
No,
Like, nobody
Batman.
knows that, but people quote that all the time.
I can be anything when I grow up. I want to be a pony. Similar.
Okay. I think those are ones that have just been, you know, this one, I don't know who first said it, but I'm not conceited, I'm convinced. You know, and I don't know where that came from. I don't know who first said it, but
I
That
was
sounds
worried
like an
about
80s
Like,
movie.
I'm not arrogant, I'm just right.
I mean, like my favorite one right now is I'm not fat, I'm bold.
I'm not fat, I'm big boned.
I'm bold.
Oh no, we're back around to Cartman.
God damn it!
Yes. Yes. One word quotes someone is asking about, Karen.
Oh, one word quote.
One word quotes that are very memorable.
Hmm.
Okay.
Zoinks.
Go. Except I said it wrong.
Dope.
but, you know.
Dope is probably one of the best. Yeah.
You know exactly what that evokes.
Yep.
So what's the Miss Piggy one that our audience member is thinking of? I can't think of it.
Miss Piggy.
Moi?
Yep, there you go. That would be it.
There-
Yep, Karen just threw it in there.
Yep.
Yes.
Nice.
I didn't even know that was a Miss Piggy quote, but
Moi?
Oh yes.
Definitely, yes.
Right.
The rainbow connection.
Quotes that
Well,
have
some of these
changed
things
over
are like-
time.
In the back of your head that maybe or maybe you've never seen Miss Piggy, probably at some point you did, but years later you know the quote, you may not know where it came from.
Mhm.
It's really scary that, you know, like all these characters that we people quote, it's actually the same person, right? Between Miss Piggy and Ernie and I think
And
those are all
Kermit, but
Jim.
that's not my.
There's Mel Blanc, where it's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, it's Mel Blanc or Maurice LaMarche. Like,
No,
Colette's question is interesting too, because I think about that all the time, because that's
Right.
one of my favorite starting quotes. The sky above the port was the color of a television turned to a dead channel. And like kids now opening that book, they're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
what's a dead channel?
Exactly. What is
Well-
a channel?
What does it mean to carbon copy something?
Right?
Well,
You
it's much
put it
better than a
inside-
silicon copy.
I thought it was a shorthand for carbonite.
Dude, I'm gonna dial you up on that. Oh wait.
Speaking of which, yes, I know.
I mean, it's,
Another good quote.
do tell me if you ever have like a student who asks you about unobtainium.
Yep. Yep. Teaching chemistry more than once.
That's
And
when
I
Black
always
Knight
tell
is-
them that it's an enigma wrapped in a question.
Which is only part of the quote, of course.
I know. It's all you need.
Yes. Yes, and as Karen comments, 42 is certainly another one-word
quote.
effectively one word.
Oh yeah, 42 is a really good one.
Good one. And completely taken out of context in a lot of cases. A lot of people know what the 42 quote, but they have no idea what it goes to.
Right.
Well, and it goes to 11.
Right.
A lot of them know
Yeah.
that. They don't know where it's from.
Yeah. I mean the one word quote that I'll use quite often in class when we're getting ready to start a test or something is, all right, everybody, engage.
Yes.
And a lot of them get it, they still do, but you know, the ones that just that blank look, they're like, what the? And I'm like, never mind. I don't know you anyway.
Get a life,
Yes.
Timey
which I think that we all are going to have to do after this.
What?
I'm actually
What
running a D&D game for about 6 hours tonight, so
How many lives are you getting in that?
I'm running it, so as many as I want to destroy.
Exactly. Best part about being DM. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this is a good place to kind of break off. I just want to basically give a chance for our panelists to
Yes,
final.
timey-wimey, wiggly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
All right. So somebody want to take it away? So what's your final quote on the way out?
I'm gonna give you 2 quotes so that people have the context. And this is
Oh, we get 2. Okay, awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Take as many as you want. I have the control. No, so never mind. I
You
was going to say I control the
horizontal.
vertical. Yeah, but
We control the horizontal.
that wasn't going to be my quote.
Gotcha.
Most people know the have you ever seen a purple cow
Yes.
poem?
Well, it Burgess.
Yes. And the follow-up,
Yes.
well, you'd probably do it better than I would, Tom.
Well,
Since
the
you're
original
better.
is, I've never seen a purple cow. I never hope to see one, but I can tell you anyhow, I'd rather see than be one. And the follow-up is, yes, I wrote the purple cow. I'm sorry now I wrote it, but I can tell you anyhow, I'll kill you if you quote it.
So we can just in my family start, yes, I wrote the purple cow. And they know it's like, shut up. I'll kill you if you quote whatever you're doing. But not to say that has anything to do with what's going on now. Who wants to take it away?
Take it away, Johnny. That's all, folks.
Oh, nice.
Ricky, a couple you said?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to sign off with Mirab. It's Mirab, his sails unfurled.
Nice.
And not a quote, but one thing I like to say usually at this time of the year, which is Eid Mubarak, y'all. It is the end of Ramadan, and that's usually Eid. So it's Eid Mubarak, y'all.
Oh.
I mean, is that a quote literally?
That's a quote from me. You can quote me on it. So no copyright infringement.
Very nice.
Do we have to use your actual name or your nom de plume?
Yeah.
It's open source at this point, so go on.
And of course, from The Dark is Rising, but tomorrow will be beyond imagining.
Yes. Nice one.
Anybody else? Final words?
I've got my last one here, which is, somebody mentioned Buckaroo Banzai a while back. Something I often tell to my students when there's a really long explanation that I really don't want to tell them right at that second, maybe later. It's the one where it starts off with, "What's that watermelon for?" And the response, of course, is, "I'll tell you later."
Yes.
So thanks, everybody. Tell you later.
They never do.
They never do. Yeah.
All right. So thanks for participating. And I guess on Sunday, we'll see you, some of you, hopefully, for the dinosaur panel. And
Is this
Dinosaurs
Sunday or
is
Monday?
right? Dinosaurs
Monday.
is Monday.
Monday.
Dinosaurs is Monday.
We won't be there, but have a great time.